What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. We're here to discuss two topics today. One, Brian Gutekunst all but confirmed that Elton Jenkins, as we expected, is going to be moving to the center position this season. The Packers also, a few days ago, signed linebacker Kristian Welch, a familiar face. So we're going to talk about what his addition means for this Packers team, what Elton Jenkins moving to center means for the Packers offensive line unit here on today's episode. But first, before we do all that, you know what to do. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work, including article versions of what we're discussing here today over at ESPNlacrosse.com. And my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. So like I said, we're going to kick things off here with the addition of Kristian Welch at linebacker. Welch was with the Packers during the 2023 season. He was signed very late in the process. It was during roster cutdowns. He was originally with the Baltimore Ravens during that 2023 training camp. Preseason was released. Packers signed him initially to the practice squad, and by week 4 he was a regular special teams contributor on that 2023 Packers team. From week 4 through the divisional round of the playoffs, Welch played 237 special team snaps. That's nearly 50% of the Packers' entire special team snaps during that range from week 4 of the 2023 season through the divisional round. That was the 4th most on the team. He played across 4 of the 6 special teams phases that there are. He was 3rd on the team in tackles. And while, as we always say, PFF's grading system is not the be-all, end-all, it is helpful for comparison's sake, right? Welch ranked 39th in the entire NFL out of 188 eligible special teams contributors in PFF special teams grade. And Kristian Welch, when he talked about last summer, his ability to contribute on special teams, the plays that he made, playing at the level that he did, he said a lot of it just comes down to wanting it more than the other person across from you. So Welch was with the Packers through training camp in the preseason last year, the 2024 season, made a really, really strong push to make the Packers 53-man roster, but he was ultimately released at cutdowns and was originally signed by the Denver Broncos and spent some time last year as well with the Baltimore Ravens. Matt LaFleur said after those roster cutdowns last year that Welch really did everything that he could have done. This was ultimately, and these are my words now, it was ultimately a crowded linebackers room for the Packers. You had Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Edgerrin Cooper, Tyron Hopper, Eric Wilson. That's already 5 linebackers on your 53-man roster. Could the Packers have kept 6? They could have. However, that takes away, of course, from another position group, right? If you're going heavy at one position, that means you have to go light elsewhere. And you have some core special teams contributors within that group of players just mentioned. So even with what Welch did really well, carving out a role among that group in terms of being a regular contributor would have been difficult, right? So that becomes harder to justify. Why should we keep a 6th linebacker on the roster? Now, as we look ahead to 2025, Welch is back with the team. There's a more clear path for him to make this Packers roster, and the reason for that is Eric Wilson is now with the Minnesota Vikings. So one, just from a roster spot perspective, there is an opening. You know, if we're going to go under the assumption that Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Tyron Hopper, and Edgerrin Cooper are going to make up the Packers linebacker room, there is an opening for one more player to step into that 5th spot, not to mention that Eric Wilson was a core special teams contributor during his time with the Packers. So it's not just a roster spot that's open at the linebacker position, but it's a really, really key special teams player who can impact a number of positions within that special teams unit, playing across multiple phases, which, as we highlighted at the start of this, Kristian Welch has done at various stops, but also done here in a Packers uniform. When it comes to the defensive side of the ball, again, special teams is going to be Welch's bread and butter. It's how he's going to contribute to this Packers team. But last year, how we saw him utilized within Jeff Hafley's defense was with the 3rd defense in training camp. He was often the middle linebacker, the Mike linebacker of that group, although Welch said he's comfortable playing any of the spots within that defense. And he did make some plays. In the Packers' final 2 preseason games, Welch had 2 interceptions and a pass breakup. So again, this is a boost to the Packers special teams unit, bolsters the back end of the depth chart at the linebacker position, and there is absolutely a path moving forward for Kristian Welch to make this 2025 Packers roster. All right, now let's move on to Elton Jenkins. Monday, it is the annual NFL league meeting down in Florida. Brian Gutekunst is there. Matt LaFleur is there. Brian Gutekunst spoke at the media on Monday, and among the variety of topics that were discussed was Elton Jenkins and what position is he going to play along the offensive line now that the Packers brought in Aaron Banks in free agency. And Brian Gutekunst all but confirmed that, and again, not surprisingly, that Elton Jenkins is going to move to center. Brian Gutekunst would say that he thinks Jenkins has the chance to be an all-pro caliber center on this Packers team, and said he's excited to see what Jenkins can do at that center position. And like I said, this was an expected move once the Packers made the addition of Aaron Banks in free agency. And it does sound like there were conversations before that signing was made between the front office and Elton Jenkins to confirm that you're going to make this move. Are you good with making this move? All of those other aspects to get the go-ahead to bring in Aaron Banks, who throughout his career at the 49ers has been a left guard. Josh Myers obviously left in free agency to go to the New York Jets. So there was an opening at the center position. And looking at this Packers roster, Elton Jenkins, given his background in college and early on in his tenure with the Packers, was a natural fit to slide into that center position. During Jenkins' final 2 seasons of college at Mississippi State, he was the starting center, had over 1,700 snaps at the center position during those 2 seasons. Now at the NFL level, he's primarily been a guard. According to Pro Football Focus, throughout his career, he has 369 career snaps with the Packers at the center position, but 297 of them came in 2020. But he did have 1 start last year during the 2024 season at the center position, Week 9 against the Detroit Lions when Josh Myers was out for that game. Now, of course, there's the run blocking component, there's the pass blocking component to playing the center position, just like any of the other offensive line positions. But the center's job really starts pre-snap. There's different responsibilities that the center has versus the other positions along the offensive line. It's their job to identify how the defense is aligned. It's their job to identify any changes to the defensive alignment that impacts what the blocking responsibilities are. It's their job to communicate any protection changes to the offensive line, the running backs, the tight ends, and obviously the quarterback has to hear what the protection line changes are going to be. It's the center's job to do all of that before the ball is snapped. And obviously having a strong rapport with the quarterback is going to be an important element to this as well. Now, naturally, it's a different position, right? Guard versus center. There's going to be some adjustments that have to be made. There's the communication component to playing center that we just described. There's footwork. There's the general responsibilities that you have as a blocker, as a center versus a guard. However, and Jenkins talked about this last season before eventually making that start at center in Week 9 against the Detroit Lions, that, yeah, there's obviously going to be some technical changes from playing guard versus center. But he said overall, it's not a difficult transition for him. It's a position he's played previously. He's obviously very familiar with the Green Bay Packers offense. So communicating, identifying those changes, what the protection responsibility of players are, not something that Elton Jenkins is concerned with. All right, so what does this move for Jenkins from guard to center? We just talked about what it means for him. What does it mean for this Packers offensive line unit as a whole? Last season, and we've discussed the offensive line here quite a bit, but last season, the Packers offensive line group, they were one of the better units in football pass protection-wise. By ESPN's pass blocking efficiency metric, the Packers offensive line unit as a whole, they ranked 7th in the NFL. According to Pro Football Focus, Jordan Love during the regular season was the most blitzed quarterback in football. However, in terms of pure pressure rate on him, he ranked 23rd. Packers offensive line did a really good job of picking up those blitzes, giving Jordan Love the time that he needed in the pocket. However, the area of opportunity for this group, and if you tune in often to our show, you know where I'm going with this. It's in the run game. It's generating more really big runs is the area of opportunity for this Packers offensive line unit. Pro Football Focus has their metric, breakaway percentage. How often, relative to the number of carries that you get as a running back, are you generating a rush of at least 15 yards, a really big chunk run? How often are you generating those plays? Josh Jacobs ranked 32nd in the NFL last season in the frequency at which he generated those runs. Now, we've seen Josh Jacobs with the ball. his ability to make defenders miss, to turn nothing into something is excellent, right? So that stat isn't about Josh Jacobs, in my opinion. It's about the play of the offensive line and how do they help Josh Jacobs get to the second level more cleanly, more often, so he's in space, can make those defenders miss like we know he can, and can then in turn generate those breakaway runs, those runs of 15, 20, 25 yards. Because again, there just weren't a ton of those for this Packers offense last season. They were really good with Josh Jacobs at picking up 4, 5, 6 yards. And there is, don't get me wrong, there is a ton of value in that. But in terms of if you're going to lean as heavily on the run game as the Packers did, and as it looks like as much as they want to moving forward, you're going to need some of those home runs being a bigger part of the equation. And I've brought up this stat before, but of Jacobs' total rushing yards, which was over 1,300 yards last season, roughly 75% of them came after contact. For some context, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, their percentage of yards after contact were in the 50 to 55% range. So think about how many more yards, how many more big runs Josh Jacobs could generate if he's kept clean, at that much higher of a rate, if he has got more opportunities to get to the second level. So that's where the area of opportunity for this Packers offensive line unit lies. And we look at Aaron Banks, bringing him in. His strength as a blocker during his time with the 49ers has been in the run game. His Matt Bowen of ESPN wrote about, Aaron Banks being a really good gap blocking offensive lineman. And we saw the Packers pivot to more of that running style last season with Josh Jacobs. So a potential upgrade to just the offensive line in the whole in that regard. Now you're sliding over Elgton Jenkins to center to take over for Josh Myers, who again, PFF's grading system is not the be-all end-all, but for comparison's sake, ranked among the lower centers in football last season as a run blocker. So shifting Jenkins over to replace Myers, adding Aaron Banks into the mix as well, and you can see a path forward for how this Packers offensive line unit can be much more effective in the run game. Now, the other component that is a part of this equation with Banks coming in, Jenkins sliding over to center, is what does this mean for Jordan Morgan? The Packers could once again have him compete for playing time at right guard with Sean Ryan, but I also think that there's some added flexibility that they gain to give him some snaps at left tackle. If they feel the need to create a bit of a competition for Rasheed Walker at that spot, I think there's some added flexibility to do that, again, with the addition of Banks, with Jenkins sliding over to center. So there's obviously a trickle-down effect to this. It's not just Jenkins moving over to center. What does that mean for him? But at a position group, the offensive line, where the sum of the parts are greater than any one individual, by moving Jenkins over, there's an obvious trickle-down effect, and I think a positive one in many respects, right? Potentially improved running game, more options for Jordan Morgan that comes with that move. All right, before we get out of here, last thing I want to say, while we just talked about Packers starting offensive line in place, they're going to have Jordan Morgan competing for some playing time as well at either right guard or at left tackle. Let's not forget about the depth of this Packers offensive line unit, and that there are still some unknowns around it once we start to get beyond those top 5, top 6 offensive linemen on the depth chart. True Media, they published some statistics recently. The Packers offensive line unit ranked first in the NFL last season in number or percentage of the total offensive snaps played together. So the starting combination of Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Zach Tom were on the field for 81% of the Packers' total offensive snaps last season. That was the most in football. That is very much an outlier, though, compared to the rest of the NFL. There were only 11 teams out of the 32 where their offensive line unit combination that saw the most snaps together were on the field for over 50% of the total team offensive snaps. Again, 11 NFL offensive line combinations were on the field together for at least 50% of their total offensive snaps. 1/3 of the NFL were on the field together. Their most used offensive line combination, 1/3 of the teams were on the field together for less than 34% of their total offensive snaps. It's an unfortunate part of the game, but injuries happen, right? And so that continuity component that we talked about earlier and the importance of that, particularly when it comes to offensive line play, what the Packers experienced last year, again, 81% of the snaps with that same starting five, not common. Depth has to be improved, has to be addressed. And we unfortunately saw in the playoff game against Philadelphia, when Elton Jenkins leaves with an injury, Jordan Morgan's already on injured reserve at that point. We saw the unknowns of the depth that the Packers have along the offensive line. Travis Glover stepped in, rookie, for his first real significant snaps, penalized numerous times. They went to Kadeem Talfort then, second-year offensive line with not a ton of experience either, took over. And like Brian Gutekunst said after the season, you don't want to overreact to any one performance, right? Especially against that Eagles defensive front, who makes a lot of starting offensive line units look silly. But as we look ahead to this group behind the starting five and Jordan Morgan, who's going to step up, right? Who's going to step up and provide that stability if needed? Who's going to be that seventh player on the depth chart, that eighth player on the depth chart to give that depth some needed stability? Because while the hope is, I imagine the hope internally is that Glover, Talfort, Jacob Monk, one of them, two of them can make that step, right? Can make those strides, can be that dependable player off the bench. There's obvious risks that come with assuming that that's going to happen, assuming that that's going to be a part of the equation. And as the numbers I read off about earlier just show, you can't only count on your starting five. You can't even count on your top six offensive linemen, because statistically, you're probably going to have to go deeper than that on your depth chart over the course of the season, because again, injuries are just an unfortunate part of it. So how are the Packers going to improve that depth? Internal development's obviously going to be an important part of it. You hope those players I just mentioned, Monk, Glover, Talfort, take those steps, make those strides. But competition has been such a catalyst throughout this roster over the last two seasons in terms of just growth, not just on the offensive line, but again, this roster as a whole. So the Packers spent in free agency on Aaron Banks. They have their starting five in place. They have a sixth offensive lineman coming off the bench in Morgan, Ryan, or Walker. One of those three is going to be coming off the bench this season. They're positioned well. But the numbers, the data shows more depth is needed, and so we should still anticipate the offensive line being very much on the Green Bay Packers radar in the upcoming NFL draft. So there you have it, my friends. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the channel. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNLacrosse.com and download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Till next time, friends, take care.